Let's talk to property lawyer Sophie Campbell-Adams. Sophie, good morning to you. Welcome.
Hi.
I mean, this is something that a lot of people will be thinking about. That spare room website obviously is seeing an uptick because people are thinking, OK, I'm struggling with mortgage payments. I need to think of another way, and this is perhaps an easier way to do it. We should kind of just start with the rules, I suppose. The difference, first of all, between a lodger and a subtenant or a tenant.
A tenant. So the key difference between the two is what's called exclusive possession. So with a tenant, you have exclusive possession of the property as a whole, and you can decide who comes in and when they come in. Whereas with a lodger, one, the landlord lives with you and you share the same facilities, but you don't have that exclusive possession. The landlord should, if they're smart and they prepare the agreement correctly, they should reserve the right to come into your room whenever they want, so you don't create that exclusive possession.
So with a lodger, you can do that. You can go into the room whenever you want. But if you were a subtenant of that room or a tenant of the room, then the landlord wouldn't have the right.
So they wouldn't necessarily be a subtenant because you're still sharing the facilities you're sharing the kitchen, the bathroom, the living room with the landlord. So it would be difficult to create a subtenant agreement.
And then just in terms of the rules, if you are going to consider having someone else live in your home and pay you, who do you have to inform?
So you'll have to firstly speak with your lender if you've got a mortgage, because there may be terms within your mortgage deed that say you can't share occupation. So it's always worth speaking to them first and saying, I'm thinking about getting a lodger, will I be breaching my terms? Because what you don't want to do is not tell them, the lender then finds out, and they consider that to be an event of default. And so they can, if they want to, say, I need all your mortgage paid now.
So let me paint a scenario for you, Sophie, and you can pick your way through it.
OK.
There's a shelf in the fridge. I've got a lodger, and there's a shelf in the fridge.
Yeah.
And there's an argument about who's had the milk, OK? And it escalates. And you don't call them... Who's the other person? You've got the lodger and the...
The landlord.
The landlord.
Yeah.
And the landlord says, do you know what, I've had enough of this. It's happened 4 times in a row. You're out, OK? And I want you out tonight. And the lodger, meanwhile, is saying, what are you making all the fuss about? It's just the milk. I don't want to go. I haven't got anywhere to go. What's the law say?
What's the law? So, the difficulty with lodgers is that you do have far less rights than tenants. It doesn't mean that you can get evicted overnight, but you're not as protected as tenants. So, for example, with a tenant, you have to serve an eviction notice, and if they don't leave, you have to get an order for possession. Whereas with lodgers, as long as you terminate it in accordance with the agreement, so if you have to give a week's notice, you give a week's notice, and then they can leave the property.
OK, so you go back to a document that you've signed.
Yes.
Ideally, but I'm assuming that in quite a lot of these lodger situations, there's no document, there's no agreement, is there?
Casual agreement.
You have it informally, you just do it.
So, yes.
What about then?
There doesn't have to be a formal agreement. It's always wise to have one.
And if there's not, what happens in the scenario I'm talking about?
If there's not, then you still have to give reasonable notice. And reasonable, it all comes down to the circumstances. So if you pay rent weekly, for example, then a reasonable notice period would be a week. If you pay it monthly, then a month, and so on and so forth.
What if a lodger refuses to leave?
If a lodger refuses to leave, then there's sort of 2 ways you can go about it. You must never use force, because then you will be breaking the law. You're not allowed to forcefully remove them. But if you give notice properly in accordance with either the law or the lodger's agreement, then you can change the locks once they're outside of the property. Or alternatively, you can ask the police to come assist you to remove them.
I'll tell you what, anyone listening to our chat now, they'd be thinking, why would you ever? Because it sounds like there's so many possible scenarios. I'm assuming most of the time, most people, it works. You know, it's mutually beneficial and it's OK.
Yeah, I mean, in my line of work, I only hear the bad stories, I hear the horror stories. So I'm sure there are countless lodger landlords that live in harmony.
That's a good positive note. I like that.
Yeah.
Because inevitably you'll be hearing the stuff when it goes wrong. And so it's people need to know that, don't they? They know what they're going in, know what you're going into.
Also, I think if you're going to share your space with a stranger, you have to accept that they're someone you don't know. I know that's the obvious definition of a stranger, but they will have habits and ways that you will inevitably not agree with.
Yeah, there's going to be some teething problems, I'm sure, as you get used to living in each other's space. But it's always wise to have that agreement in place so that if something does go wrong, you know, let's say, for example, they stop paying the licence fee or they damage the property for whatever reason, you can terminate the agreement early.
Wise words. Appreciate your expertise this morning. That's Sophie Campbell-Adams, who's with the law firm Britton and Time, just talking about lodgers and how it works out in practice.
Thank you.
Thank you.